welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today on our third part of our webinar. I'm just going to hand over to Claire to make our introductions, and I'll be back shortly.
Thank you, Bakani. Yes, so my name is Claire Fussell and I am the Campaign Director for Operation Noah. And this, as Bakani was saying, is the third of our four-part series looking at Catholic social teaching and investment in climate solutions. And today we are hoping to welcome Luke Boris, who is joining us from Mopo Energy. And they are a company that provide sustainable power across Africa. They have sort of battery packs and other kind of small scale renewable energy solutions. And they're going to be talking about how their investment model works and how companies like them are providing climate solutions across the global south, and how that might be something that churches can consider when thinking about our broader investment portfolios. But I'd like to start by, I think somebody else needs to click me to the next slide. There we go. By sort of just talking through. Oh, well, I think we've just gone past the outline for today. We're going to hear from Bakani Shidsu first, who will be talking through Operation Noah's latest Catholic Social Teaching Toolkit, which is a pack that's designed for churches and religious institutions to work through together and consider how they best align their climate, well, their wider investments with the principles and tenets of Catholic social teaching. So we'll be looking today at two of those chapters of that toolkit and two of those Catholic social teaching principles. And there'll be time for discussion towards the end and any questions that you might have. This webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards to review. But if you have any questions, do put them into the chat, and we will not record that discussion at the end. So it will be sort of a closed and private discussion that won't be on YouTube. So no need to be concerned about that. So without any further ado, will lead us in an opening prayer. God of life, creator of the earth and all that it contains, you rested and saw that all you had made and proclaimed that it was good. Encourage us to lift our heads from the daily grind and know that we are always in your sight. Empower us to break the chains that bind people in unfulfilling work and to bring hope to those that toil unseen. Open our eyes to see what is truly important and lead us to seek the real wealth that only comes from you, making itself felt in dignity and justice for all. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Claire. And as we begin our webinar today, we obviously are making this presentation within the context of the ongoing climate crisis, recognizing that those who are most affected are already vulnerable to droughts, flooding. And today we especially want to use our toolkit to put them at the forefront of our minds. And we really think of the toolkit as, just make sure that I'm not hiding any of the screen there. Hope you can still see that okay. We want to recognize that as Christians, responding to the climate crisis in a tangible way is responding to Jesus' command that we love our neighbor. And by investing in climate solutions that protect and sustain communities affected by climate change, we can show that love and solidarity in a practical way. So as Claire mentioned, the toolkit Catholic social teaching offers a rich tradition of wisdom and guidance, showing us how to apply the gospel message to pressing social, economic, and political challenges of our time. Its roots stretch back to the teachings of Jesus, the early church, papal writings, and Vatican guidance, emphasizing how we can be in right relationship with God and each other and our planet. So we have a responsibility to use our resources, whether as individuals or within our organizations, to contribute to a fairer, greener world. And this toolkit aims to align investment strategies with CST principles and is designed for financial directors, treasurers, trustees, and committee members within Catholic dioceses, organizations, congregations, and religious orders, as well, of course, as campaigners who want to encourage those organizations to align their Catholic values with their investments. That being said, the toolkit is intended to provide general guidance and, as well as this webinar, is meant to be educational information and does not constitute or intend to constitute investment advice or any investment service. It is not a substitute for professional investment advice and is really intended to be used alongside your engagements with investment professionals. The toolkit is structured in 7 different chapters, each focusing on the core pillars of Catholic social teaching and its relevance to addressing the climate crisis. And each chapter uses the See, Judge, Act framework and a methodology which is very familiar to those who know about CST and is used to explore how investors might discern their impact. So today we are diving into 2 key principles, and we're beginning with subsidiarity and participation in governance. So this principle is foundational to how we understand decision-making and collective action within Catholic social teaching. And when we think about what is subsidiarity, it's one that it took me a little while to get my head around, but I understand it in essence as ensuring that decisions are made at the most appropriate level, as close as possible to those who will be affected by them. So higher level institutions should not be interfering with the internal life of a community or group unless absolutely necessary. So I was at an event recently and somebody asked, the Pope has spoken so clearly about climate change. Why doesn't he just issue an edict to say everybody should be investing in renewables and we shouldn't be investing in fossil fuels, and all the dioceses all around the world would have to follow it. But a big part of Catholic social teaching is in fact that decision-making is really, to use a more modern political phrase, devolved to the dioceses themselves to make some of these choices. So instead, institutional organizations should support and enable those in smaller or more local entities to fulfill their functions. So we have a short video from CAFOD, which I think really clearly lays this out.
Subsidiarity. Here's a way to remember what subsidiarity means. Subsid is the first part of the word subside. If a house subsides, something has gone wrong at the lowest level. Subsidiarity means that decisions should be taken at the lowest possible level by the people most affected. Subsidiarity is a key principle of Catholic social teaching. It's about allowing people freedom and letting communities control their own situations. The Second Vatican Council wrote, "The workers themselves should share in deciding the conditions on which their future depends." Individuals or groups should be free to solve problems by themselves. If they struggle, the next higher level must offer assistance, but without making people dependent. Everyone should share responsibility through participation. Like every principle of Catholic social teaching, subsidiarity is based on Scripture. In the book of Exodus, Jethro said to Moses, "Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case themselves." And in the early church, the apostles let the church members decide who should distribute food each day. So, what might subsidiarity look like in CAFOD's work? Here's one example. A farmer growing her crops should not be told which seeds to use by a powerful international seed company. She should be free to decide which seeds to use. So, CAFOD helps farmers to find ways to grow and share their own seeds, while also campaigning with them to change how the food system is controlled. What other examples of subsidiarity can you find? Subsidiarity.
Great. So today we'll have a think about what that might mean within the context of investments. But an example that I would like to share with you is from an organization that I've recently learned a little bit more about, having met them at the a recent Let Out to Sea movement event. And they are the Global Green Grants Fund. And it was really helpful to hear how they think about where they share funds and the decision-making process that they use to do that. So closely linked to this principle of subsidiarity is, as we heard, participation in governance. And this highlights the rights and responsibilities of all people to participate in decisions that affect their lives and the common good. It's about empowering individuals and communities to have a voice and influence in how societies run, including economic and environmental matters. So for investors, this means considering how investments can support or empower local communities and individuals to support in decisions about their own development and the management of their resources and lands, especially in the context of climate solutions. So Global Green Grants Fund is an organization that has been leading in the world in supporting grassroots-led efforts to protect the planet and rights of people. And the way in which they work is with over 200 volunteer experts worldwide who serve on approximately 30 regional and thematic advisory boards. And each volunteer serves as their eyes and ears on the ground and brings an expertise from the area in which they live, their own experiences, and their professional work. And they provide a personal connection in country. So each board then creates a strategy for their grant making annually, and each advisor then finds potential grantees in their networks. And the boards then determine which groups will receive the funding and can reach critical groups that most other funders might not be able to. So their model in awarding grants is known as participatory grant making. I think what's really interesting about this is, as Catholic organizations, there tend to be international connections and networks that we can leverage in really interesting ways to make a difference in the communities that we've had relationships with for many years. And so to go to the See, Judge, Act framework in the toolkit, here we offer resources that can help us to see more clearly what is happening in those communities which are particularly vulnerable. So we think of the C section of the toolkit as really supporting and contributing, in addition to the very useful charts and data and spreadsheets that we already use in this kind of decision making, to give a more holistic view. And here we can think about, are the communities that we are investing in and supporting given a voice in the climate solutions being proposed and implemented in their area. Next, we look at the judge, or the discerning section. And here we provide some questions that you might want to ask as Catholic investors when working with your investment managers. And also internally to think about, well, do our investment policies ensure that the communities affected have a genuine say in projects? For example, can they veto projects, particularly those related to climate solutions, if they don't deem them to be really practicable or infringe on other rights? And what measures are in place to ensure that the benefits of climate investments are shared equitably with local populations? We might also want to think about what mechanisms are in place to ensure fair representation and maybe benefit sharing for those climate initiatives. And again, this is something that I hope we will hear about shortly. So in the final section in the ACT part, we invite organizations to create opportunities for community and stakeholder engagement, and where possible, invest in funds that explicitly integrate local participation and benefit sharing as a key criteria. And we know that this is more ambitious, certainly, than the way in which most of the finance world acts. But again, this is where we as Christian organizations might be able to make a meaningful difference. So in this section of the toolkit, we look at this really key principle for ensuring that our economic systems serve humanity and not the other way around. It felt really good to have written this toolkit before Pope Leo chose his name, and to be really inspired by Pope Leo the 13th, who in Rerum Novarum, it's another tongue twister, talked especially about the rights of workers. And this document was really seen as the foundational document for Catholic social teaching. And I do hope that in choosing that name, Pope Leo will continue in this tradition. And I thought this was quite an apt statement, which could really be applied to today when we look at the ways in which people are working, particularly in the global south, in bringing resources that we use, especially in the global north. And so at its heart, this principle asserts that the economy exists for the person and not the person for the economy. And every person has a right to dignified work, fair wages, safe working conditions, and the ability to form unions. And to me, this was quite radical that the church was already speaking and talking and advocating in this way. And this principle extends beyond workers and also to consumers, so all the ways in which we act as economic actors, if you will. And Pope Benedict the 14th observed in Caritas Veritate that global interconnectedness has led to the emergence of a new political power, that of consumers and their associations. So purchasing is always a moral and not simply economic act. Hence, the consumer has a specific social responsibility which goes hand in hand with their with the social responsibility of the enterprise. And if we think this is the case for workers, for consumers, for companies as they employ people, what more so for investors in those organizations too. So again, to look at the See, Judge, Act framework, in the toolkit, we offer resources to research and better understand whether the climate solutions we're considering are built on ethical labor practices, and suggest a resource that is used by many investors to look at the companies in which they are investing and what their ethical practices might be. Often, church investors might be invested in pooled funds. So this might be a little bit more tricky to do. And this might be something that, as we move on to the judge section, as you engage with your investment managers, might want to ask what frameworks they are using to look into the companies that they invest in. So we might want to know, do investments support companies that uphold fair labor practices, living wages, and safe conditions? And especially within the green sector, we want the transition to clean energy to be a just transition and not repeating the mistakes of the fossil fuel industry and industrial past. And so what practical things can organizations do? Obviously, investing in companies that have strong labor standards and fair wage policies, and those policies are actually implemented, and clear commitments to worker rights, um, perhaps shared return structures, and including the right to organize and unionize. And obviously, that's something that has fallen by the wayside, especially in the last few decades, and can be quite controversial. But it was interesting as we were researching the toolkit to see how much the church has really stood up for and advocated for workers across the decades. Welcome, Luke Burrows, who is joining us from Mobile Power, nicknamed Mopo.
Well, brilliant. Thanks for inviting me to your little forum. Seems like a really exciting and engaging discussion. I've not been to one of these before, so I'm a little bit off piste. But I'm Luke Burrows. I'm the COO, not CEO, of Mopo. We started out being called Mobile Power, and a lot of our customers, English is not their first language, so they started calling us Mopo. And actually, we're now on a journey, kind of rebranding to be Mopo, as our customers call us, which is quite good fun. I am a co-founder of Mopo, along with four other guys, three of whom are all followers of Jesus. I am not a Catholic, but I have grown up following Jesus from year dot. My parents were missionaries during the Bosnian War. Always had a bit of a focus on how Jesus calls us to be with the poor and to be kind of pushing forwards the marginalized. My wife works recently got a job actually with the Diocese of Sheffield on the Anglican side of things. So I feel like I'm learning quite a lot about the established church, albeit on the Anglican side of things. So yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really excited to talk about Mopo today. There are a load of different angles we could take this on, although time is short. So I'll give a bit of a brief overview to what Mopo does, and then I just really welcome you guys having questions for me about whether it's from a faith perspective, why we're involved and how we see the angle, whether it's from an economic perspective, how we think about development. I think we have quite a unique take on that, or indeed just about the business model, customers, things that we're doing in the world. So I'm sat here in Sheffield, in the UK, at our UK headquarters. We have three different ways of thinking about our company. So here behind me, you can see lots of geeks working away on technology, and we run most of our investments. So our finance guys sit upstairs and project managers sit upstairs as well. It's a very English organization. And then we have a company in China where we organize our manufacturing and run our supply chain for our equipment. And then the vast majority of my colleagues, about 1,200 of our colleagues, are in the continent of Africa, spread across 4 nations. So Nigeria, DRC, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And they're very much out there and running the business and doing the real stuff. So what is the real stuff? What are we doing? Well, if I can get this next slide to come up. Mopo is about the distribution of energy. So we install small solar powered hubs, mini power stations, if you like, in the middle of communities, all the way from hyper rural, all the way to some of the largest cities on the planet in Kinshasa and Lagos. Those solar powered hubs charge batteries, just like this one, which is our smallest battery, or like this one, which is our biggest battery. We rent these batteries out to customers via local agents. Those local agents work with us on a commission basis, have access to the Mopo hub, have access to the batteries that we rent out. And so far, we've done just over 27 million rentals of these batteries. We're lighting up the homes of about 500,000 people. As I said, we've created about 1,200 jobs across those 4 countries. And we're hiring about 20 people a week at the moment in Africa into dignified, meaningful work. So those are kind of like, that's the core of the business. So we generate electricity, we distribute it via agents, and we allow customers in often totally off-grid areas, but often in weak grid areas as well, to access renewable energy on a really reliable basis for less than they're currently getting access to energy. What are customers using it for? It's things like mobile phone charging, fans, TVs, and then a lot of businesses around ice. Believe it or not, in these countries, ice is a really big business. And then we also run an e-mobility platform. So the core is this small battery, which is with low income, really low income customers. We can go all the way from customers who rent once a month to customers who rent multiple times a day. So we are able to serve customers right across the wealth spectrum. Then replacing petrol generators, often with this bigger battery. Nigeria is a really interesting case study. There is more spent on the subsidy of fuel in Nigeria than is spent on the combination of education, healthcare, and the military. So it's kind of it's a crazy nut to crack for that society if you can begin to harvest what is readily available in Nigeria, which is the sun, and then distribute it to people in a really economically sustainable way, but also a way that is really democratic. And that's what we believe is at the core of our business. And then the third thing that we're beginning to do is motorbike taxis, electric motorbike taxis across some of the larger cities that we operate in. I think there's a huge opportunity there, not just for creating meaningful jobs from what is actually a little bit of a vulnerable position for a lot of riders at the moment, but actually doing that in a green way and in a way that harvests the resources that these nations already have, rather than importing and subsidizing fuels that they don't have often. We've really worked hard on technology. So we don't operate as a charity. We operate as a limited company. We believe in the profit incentive. We are scaling really, really quite quickly at the moment. Octopus Energy just became our largest shareholder last week. And the reason for that is that we have an economic engine. So as well as creating connections and light for customers and meaningful jobs for our staff, we're actually creating return for investors. And what that means is that we're able to scale this to the size of the problem. 600 million people on a continent don't have access to any electricity. And I would say closer to 1 billion have access to subpar electricity, which is stopping economic development and all of these kind of things. Unfortunately, with our economic system, like it or not, you cannot scale a charity to reach that scale of the problem, and you can't use the profit incentive to drive growth. So we really believe in being a company and not a charity, and we've done quite well in that paradigm so far. That means we have to have access to technology in order to control our platform and scale it at the rate that we're scaling it. And the patents around our technology are a big part of our business and our moat. A little bit of a case study. This is Kikwit, which is a town about the same size as Sheffield, actually, although much lower population since the end of colonialization there. We have nearly 20%, actually slightly more than 20% of that town getting their energy from Mopo. And we've invested a relatively small amount of money, under $500,000 when I made this case study at least. And 20% of the community are getting their energy from the sun through Mopo. We were able to grow that really quickly. We were able to serve an awful lot of households, an awful lot of people, and create meaningful jobs. There are no expats in any of our African operations. They're all the way from the most senior leaders all the way to the most junior, are from the local areas or from those nations if you're talking at senior leadership level. It's been hard won. Growing a business on the continent, especially a hardware business, is really slow. It's not Silicon Valley. So we've been trying at this for a long time. As I said, a really strong belief in having to make this economically viable and scalable. So always a focus on the economics. But we've really got some momentum now, and we're growing at about 300% a year last year, and hopefully about 200% this year. So really opening up the taps on how quickly we can scale this. And I think just one slide that I put in here about Africa know-how. Running a business in sub-Saharan Africa is like nowhere else. There are very few large companies operating in sub-Saharan Africa, I'd say, with the exception of Coca-Cola or Unilever. And the reason for that is it's very different culturally to anywhere else. And the challenges there are hugely different. We're very proud of the fact that we've managed to work with so many people from the continent to build a scaling business. But that's quite a unique position that we've managed to get ourselves into. So we're quite excited for that. But I think we've also got a lot to learn. As investors, if you like, people with wealth, we at MP UK have access to a lot of asset development now. As investors, how do we point that at the continent in a way that creates meaningful growth on the continent and not just here in Sheffield for people who are investing the money, but actually create a snowball effect on the continent. I think that's all I wanted to talk about, except from people, which I've harped on about very much. So these are our 4 country leaders that we're very proud of. And I think that's all I wanted to say, but I'd really love to open it up to some questions. I wasn't quite sure where the forum would go and what would grab people as interesting.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and really appreciated that really helpful presentation. I look forward to welcoming you next week when we'll have a focus on building a future of peace. So looking at peace as a last Catholic social teaching pillar, and how faith-based investing can be for a sustainable world in that context. Please join us when we'll also have a guest presentation and case study from Sister Susan Francois, who is the bursar or treasurer of the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Peace. So that will be on the 23rd of July at 1 p.m. So thank you again, and we look forward to your joining us next time. Thanks.